Just finished third block and felt it was important to address some of the common problems that students are having with their essay at this particular point. So I might look at the rubric. I am concerned here in this screencast with the flow, maybe the analysis of sources, and then some of the items here that are in the rubric, like the clear, concise argument, writing too much that goes nowhere. Basically what I found, a lot of students were writing summaries and making a couple of errors that definitely would be problematic. So a couple of students have allowed me to use some of their writing, and this one is on terrorism. The LA Times bombing was an act of terrorism because the McNamara's were labor unionists who used violence against the people working for the anti-union LA Times newspaper to attempt to further social objective of ending the exploitation of laborers. So I put down, I thought this was a little too wordy. And I like how they've identified the McNamara's at this point as one of the groups, and maybe that they have a political objective. That they also are saying that the LA Times is anti-unionist. That is definitely something that is showing me that they did some of the writing, but definitely seems to be a little wordy. Well, what was their objective? Why did they target it? They targeted them for anti-union as opposed to any sort of you know act of terrorism. Then the question here is, does anti-union count as a political objective? Maybe it does. I don't know. It depends on the sources that they have. LA Times bombing committed by John McNamara was an act of terror because the conspirators used violence against the capitalist newspaper workers to advance the social objective of ending labor exploitation. So I put, what was the newspaper doing and how did the paper view different from the brothers? What I like here is that they're not just giving me a source right up top. They're just kind of giving me a little bit of background. I probably would like to see a little more background, maybe one or two sentences explaining what it was like in the 1920s with regard to union, and then that would just give you a better flow. So like if you're looking here at the rubric, it says flow. Flow of essay is often rough as the reader becomes lost in writing due to a lack of information or clarity of essay. So this could be an opportunity, like one or two sentences, 1920s labor activists challenging ideas of capitalism, something like that. And then that would give me some flow, because as I read this, I'm thinking now, we see the argument about, the newspaper, about labor exploitation, this section here. So maybe it'd be a good idea to kind of explain that labor exploitation. What were the views? Anyway, like I said, they do at least have an intro, some historic context. So like I said, it could, a little bit more detail might be better. And the New York Times article, so they're introducing their source. You could give me the date. New York Times article dated, give me the date. Disaster reel, 1910 explosion of rock. The LA Times and made a Hollywood trial follow. Dave Oshinsky emphasized the McNamara's motive as the following. The motive for the bombing seemed apparent from the start. The LA Times, a fiercely conservative newspaper, its publisher, so is conservative in this thesis. No, it's mainly about anti-union. However, if we're looking at conservative ideology and their stance on unions, maybe it works. I don't know. But again, I have to kind of figure that out. I would have to know that. Its publisher, an unpleasant mountain of a man named Harrison Gray Otis, had vowed to turn LA into a bustling non-union metropolis. So right there could be a missed opportunity, this could be something that's focused on as well, the person that they're addressing in that particular source. That could be something that's addressed. I don't know why this isn't moving, but whatever. Anyway, Harrison Gray was dedicated to making San Francisco a non-union, or in other words, a place where organized association workers could not advocate for labor rights. Therefore, his view. So my question then would be here, well, who is this guy that keeps coming up, this Harrison Otis guy? Why is this individual not mentioned in the thesis here? Maybe this guy needs to be addressed up here. The anti-unionist LA Times newspaper led by Harrison Gray Otis. And then maybe now that gives me some direction. Say, okay, well, they're probably targeting this building because they're trying to kill this guy right here. Like, this is the dude that's on the hit list. Why? Because of his views and how they, contradict the idea of the McNamara's. And maybe it'd be a good idea up here to kind of include that. That in the 1920s, some people were, capitalists, or some people were communists or anarchists. And I think that that's right for the 1920s, early 1800s, especially coming out of World War I, that there were a lot of people who were angry with capitalism, felt it was the root of all evil. And of course, that idea was challenged by people on the opposite side of the spectrum. Instead of allowing Marxists. On the contrary, the McNamara's were part of an Iron Workers Union where they believe in advocating for labor rights. Differing views led to the McNamara's committing an act of terror bombing in the LA Times. So, like right here, I would say, well, what exactly is your support? What support do you have for that claim that the McNamara's were doing this, that they're advocating for labor rights? If you have a pamphlet by them, if you have like a speech from them, if they're quoted in a newspaper saying precisely this point, then maybe that works. Like, I would want to see more information here. And that also might give us an explanation that supports this thesis, or a source that supports it. That would be the way that I would say on this. The bombing did not result in the death of Harrison Gray Otis. All right, so here they're admitting. I haven't read this, so I'm kind of doing this, getting what's going on in my mind as I read this. However, the bombing did not result in the death of Harrison Gray Otis. So that would be something that you could argue. They were or were not terrorists because they were going after this Harrison guy. This guy because he was or was not supportive of their view. Like, you could probably argue that either way, that it was terroristic because of what this guy represented, anti-union, or maybe it's just an attempt to kill this guy. Now it's murder, not terrorism. So these would be things that your sources would kind of direct you, the sources that you're citing. And up here, it's non-union. You ran to the windows, opening a door, but there was no fire escape. So this right here seems to be a summary. So my comment in this section would be, well, this seems to be a source that is giving me more of a summary of what happened about this guy trying to escape. So my question here would be, well, how does that support the thesis up here? You're trying to argue that, they were not terrorists. I really don't need an explanation of what happened here. Again, I like the flow of the essay. It seems to be very, using a narrative style of writing history. It's just not, here's a source, here's a source, here's a source, here's data, here's data, here's data. There seems to be some flow to it, although I do have a couple of questions. I would not score this student here. I probably would go somewhere here that it's choppy at times, awkward transitions, which may leave the reader lost at times. Like, I'm trying to make sense of this as I read. And so, that could be an issue that could be improved. And then, like, this source right here doesn't really support. So when we go back to the rubric, I would say that first source, I think that it clearly supports the thesis. However, I have to make a determination about how the source may or may not be used. So I have to look at the source and then the analysis. So I probably would go for this student, like a middle here for that source, and then here for the analysis. Because, I just have too many questions about that first source. And that second source that's talking about, what actually happened, I would probably go here on this one, the source support. I don't know what the analysis is for this one. So we're coming to the window. So again, it's too much in this source about what happened. Panic caused West Austin made workers like Harvey had to jump to their death. Early time established the bombing deterrent because it killed the group. So now, if in their thesis they said that it was about the use of violence, which they kind of have here, who use violence against people working in the LA Times newspaper, this might work for that thesis point, the bond. But notice, like, here it seems to be about that it's about the non-union, and then here they're kind of transitioning. And maybe that's just a result of the requirement of this not being a straight up 5-paragraph essay. It could be the reason. I don't know. Elder jumped to their death. Term compared to the pity protest that was also used at time to promote social change by labor because families lost their husbands, children. All right, so that's kind of where they're going with this. They're saying that the people who were victims, this fits the definition of terrorism because the people who were there kind of had to experience some horror. So I would say you probably want to make that particular point. So this source does work when you're using that. I'm not too fond of the transition here. So on the rubric, I don't know, I've got to look at that third source here, but looking at just this one, I'm still kind of here now. I would probably go in the middle of 0 and 2, probably be a 1. And then the analysis of the source, probably in that same category. Like, I just had too much figuring out on my end. It just didn't seem clear until I got to like right here. I would have liked to see more. All right. Notice for this source, they've given me their thesis. They have their supporting paragraph. I see some footnotes here, and then more footnotes, and then they have a works cited bibliography page, and then they're kind of breaking down newspaper and database sources. So your final product should look like this: the justified margins. The only thing I would say, and again, I took the name off, and the name of the title should be here: your one supporting paragraph, your justified margins, and then your sources, your bibliography. And if some of this information is wrong, that's okay, because I'm not going to be looking for all of the sources, making sure that all the citations are correct. That'll come with the later essay. A couple of other things: students jumping right into the supporting paragraph with no historic context. So kind of going back here, I addressed that point. Some students gave me their supporting paragraph, and then they just started right here. The motive for the bombing scene, that's kind of what they did. So some students decided just to kind of leave all of this out. That's not good. You don't want to do that. You don't want to go right into your, your sources. That's not going to help. It's going to leave me with a lot of questions, and that's probably going to be an issue. So, just imagine if the paper kind of read something like that. The LA Times, they give me their thesis. LA Times made for Hollywood trial file emphasized that McNamara's motive is following. So it's like there's nothing historic if that was submitted that way. But the student has that information. It gives me a little bit of an understanding of what it was like in the 1920s. So that's good. That helps with the flow. The Lindbergh essay. This was one that was after the thesis. And again, it gives me some historic information about Lindbergh, about the climate in the 1920s with regard to aviation. Soon after the introduction of aviation, Frenchman Raymond Orteig offered a $25,000 reward to the first person who made a nonstop flight to New York, France, and vice versa. Seeking to obtain this reward, Lindbergh set out to create a fly plane ideal for a nonstop. And then the student goes on to give me some sources about like what Lindbergh did. So here, this was the students kind of, they didn't go straight into a source, as I was saying before. They kind of gave me a little bit of historic narrative explaining kind of what happened. And again, that helps with the flow. That helps. Essay does not lose research. I wasn't lost at that particular point. Maybe I get lost somewhere else in the paragraph, but at that point I wasn't lost. Let's see, what else do I have here? All right, so we have another one. All right, on September 1920, Wall Street bombing was committed by the Galleanists. Is considered, so that word is a reference. It has historic meaning, and there's a manual that was written. So I already know that by using this term, there's something unique in the research. Considered an act term because it was an unlawful use of force and violence against the government for political gain. So they're using the definition of terrorism here. They're not giving me the definition. That's fine. They're just saying that this act was committed for political gain. I would say, well, what was the gain? Like if you add that answer to the question, that might give you a little more detail. Unlawful use of force and violence against the government for political gain. I don't know, because the Galleanists wanted X, Y, Z. All right, Wall Street is a busy area for business and trade. I would say that this is kind of off topic. We don't need that. Again, give me some of what it was like in the 1920s. 1920s. 1920s ideological, I don't know, ideological advocates, I don't know, gave speeches or they did X, Y, Z. I'm thinking of a couple of groups here, like ideological advocates. We could call these individuals anarchists. We could call these individuals communists, socialists. That might help to explain some of what was going on in the 1920s. We also know that the FBI was created primarily to go after some of these anarchist groups. So if you looked at the FBI history, that would kind of be there. Wall Street bombing was a constant busy street with, because again, impact of political decisions, a trademark. All right, so this is the interesting point here, although I don't like the way it's phrased. What I do like is that they're saying that, Wall Street represents trade, and trade is associated with capitalism, and the communist anarchists are these ideological advocates here they seem to have an issue with the trade market. So there's something there that definitely can be exploited and used to drastically improve where this is going. Like that's the reason why Wall Street's being targeted. They're not targeting Ellis Island. This isn't an immigration issue. They're targeting Wall Street primarily because of what Wall Street symbolizes. Very similar to like the 9/11 attacks. They're going after, the Trade Center for what it represents, the Pentagon for what it represents, and possibly a political institution. Wall Street was not expecting any sort of terrorism or bombing to occur. That's not needed. Never thought of this as a threat. Not needed. This unexpected use of a bomb to gain political and social size shown in Box article. So now they're getting into something, their source. Box article, capitalist cronies and chain of government also trying to benefit themselves. I don't know if that's the name of this. Notice how they used a quote, and then they're using a quote for their source. If this is the name of their article, they could have put this in italics. And then they could have just, give Amelia the quote here. To the degree of Turner stoked the sense of disorder, providing a dramatic example of destruction class meant, it was a remarkable, effective political tool. So this source has nothing to do with this up here. There's no mention to the Gallienists. There's no mention of why they were doing what they're doing. It really just seems to be something general about it. But then they go on to explaining, some of what these individuals were doing. And I would say that this is an inappropriate analysis for this particular source. This source is too general about terrorism, whereas this is specific about the Gallienists and what they were doing. Hopefully this helps.